Welcome, everybody, to our session tonight on close reading strategies with Miss Tracy Adkins. We are delighted to have Tracy with us again. She has been a presenter for us before on similar webinars, especially when we're addressing those K-3 issues and students. And so we're delighted to have Tracy with us. Please use the chat feature on your dashboard whenever you want to communicate with us. You can post questions or comments there, and we'll be glad to respond. Everybody's microphone has been disabled so that we cut down on background noise during the presentation. So Tracy, thank you for being here, and let me turn it over to you and let you start sharing with us.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Okay, my name is Tracy Adkins, and I am currently teaching third grade at Horizon Elementary in Madison, Alabama. I've been teaching for 18 years. I've taught pre-K, kindergarten, ESL, Title I, second grade, and now I teach third grade. And my real love is early childhood. So when Pam first approached me about this webinar, I began to do a lot of research on closed reading. And closed reading is a term that I've heard so much of this year and in previous years. But really, to be honest, this has been the first year that my school district has really honed in on closed reading. And so I took this as an opportunity to really get to understand it and just understand for myself what it means. So I've purposefully this school year tried to dig into it just so I understand more about it. So I began compiling just as much info as I could about closed reading. And when I began doing this, I found some really great definitions of what a closed read is. And Beth Burke, who is the author of A Close Look at Closed Reading, says, closed reading is thoughtful, critical analysis of a text that focuses on significant details or patterns in order to develop a deep, precise understanding of the text form, craft, meanings, and etc. Timothy Shanahan, who is a literary specialist, says that closed reading requires a substantial emphasis on readers figuring out a high-quality text. This figuring out, he says, is accomplished primarily by reading and discussing the text, as opposed to being told about the text by a teacher or being informed about it through some textbook commentary. And as teachers, we love to inform our students about the text before we start reading the text to them. He also says, because challenging texts do not give up their meanings easily, it is essential that readers reread such texts. Not all texts are worth close reading, he does note. A first reading is about figuring out what a text says. It is purely an issue of reading comprehension. Thus, if someone is reading a story, he or she should be able to retell the plot. If someone is reading a science chapter, he or she should be able to answer questions about the key ideas and details of that text. Oh, so sorry. Gina Connell says closed reading is purposefully reading a text several times in order to analyze and gain a deep understanding of the text. Now, she has written some articles for Scholastic, and one of her articles, Investigating Nonfiction Part 2, which is just digging deeper with closed reading, she states a definition that I just gave you of the closed reading is purposefully reading a text several times. She also gives a great definition of what she defines as a third grade term of closed reading, and that is reading something enough times so you can understand it, explain it to someone else, and ask and answer questions about it using evidence from the text. Now you'll see here, this is one of my students in my classroom working on some closed reading. And I just want to talk about some things that the closed reading strategy includes. So before you begin a closed reading, that might be something that you need to ask yourself. How do I begin a closed read of a text? Well, first, you need to understand what closed reads include. And one of the big things is using short passages and excerpts from maybe something that you've read to the class, a book that they're reading. And then also you need to be diving right into the text with limited pre-reading activities. I think this, again, is one of my hardest things to do. I like to do a lot of front loading with my students and kind of give them notes before we go into reading something. You know, if I'm doing main idea, I like to tell them a lot about main idea before we go into that. Another thing that you should do is focus on the text itself. You should also reread deliberately and let your kids read with a pencil. Let them read with colored markers. Let them read with highlighters. And then notice things that are confusing. Sometimes when you're reading something, you might notice that there are some things that you need to talk to your students about before you let them take that article or that excerpt from a book and close read on it. There might be a vocabulary word that they don't know. And then let them discuss the text with others. Think, pair, share, turn and talk. Do those things frequently, letting them just really talk about and immerse themselves in what they're reading. You also want to do closed readings in small group and in whole group. And then you want to let them respond to text-dependent questions. I like to tell my students that they are being a text detective. And they know what this means. This means that it's like they are getting out their magnifying glass and they are taking a really close look at something that we are reading. And you'll see here some steps. You'll see step 1, you'll see step 2, you'll see step 3. I would say step 1 is extremely easy. It's just kind of getting that big idea. And then step 2 is looking a little closer at whatever you're reading. Begin letting them mark something inside whatever they are reading. Let them use that highlighter. Let them use that colored pencil. And then in step 3, this is when you've dug really, really deep and they're looking at some questions and they're going back into that text and they are finding the answers to those questions. Another thing you need to make sure you're doing with closed reading is explain to your students that you'll be reading a story more than one time. This is an anchor chart that I have up in my classroom, and it's just reminding them that they are going to read something closely to understand it. When we first began closed readings, I introduced this anchor chart to them, and I just explained that the first time we are just reading the text. And then we're going to read it again. And it's kind of like we're going out and we're digging into the dirt, and we're going to dig just a little bit deeper into what we're reading. And then the third time, we are going to go even deeper down into the dirt, and we're going to read it for a third time. But this third time, we are going to be pulling out lots of details, lots of information, and we're going to be able to answer explicit questions from that text. One of the things I've done in my room that my kids had so much fun with is a closed reading Oreo lesson. So this is a great way to show your students why reading over again is so very important. So you'll see some Oreos here, and the very first thing that I did is I passed out one Oreo cookie very quickly in a little bit of a rushed way to every single student in the classroom. And then I told them, okay, now I want you to eat this as soon as you get it. And I said, I want you to eat it really fast and just get finished with it as fast as you can. And after they ate it, I quickly passed out a sticky note. And I said, okay, now I want you to write down what you just ate. And I had them share with me what they ate. And I wrote down what they said on an anchor chart. And you'll see here, there was not very much that they could tell me about that Oreo. And I explained to them that this was like the first read of a close read. They took the Oreo, they ate it as quickly as they could, and you'll see that really the only things they were able to tell me is that, well, it's an Oreo and it's a cookie with cream in the middle. So this really registered inside of them that, oh, yeah, I ate it so fast that I really couldn't tell very much about it. So then, to their amazement, which they were very excited about, I gave them a second Oreo. And I said, okay, we are going to do a second read, and we're going to read really closely with our Oreo cookie. So I actually had everyone come to the listening rug, and I gave out these instructions. I said, look at the cookie carefully. Smell the cookie. Think about the cookie. Eat the cookie. But when you eat the cookie, eat it very slowly with your eyes closed, thinking about every single bite you take. I also told them to think about the texture. Think about the way that cookie feels. Think about the taste of it while you're eating it. It was a really cute sight because every child had their eyes closed and they were really savoring every single bite of that cookie. You'll see some finished a little sooner than others, and they enjoyed watching their friend do a close reading of their cookie. Well, then, after we finished eating that second cookie, we recorded the info on an anchor chart. And you'll see up at the top here our first read, where we could only tell that it was an Oreo, and it was a cookie with cream in the middle. And then you'll see our second read. In this second read, my students had so much more to say about their Oreo cookie. They gave me so much more information, and that's because they really took the time to savor the cookie. We had a lot of laughs, and lots of light bulbs were lighting up in their little brains as we did the second read of the Oreo cookie. So we went a little further, and we did do a third read of the Oreo cookie. Of course, they were very excited about this. After closely reading the cookie for the third time, they had to go to their desk, and they had to write down everything they could about that Oreo cookie. So I had already given them kind of a model of some information, and so they were able to take that model and really write quite a bit about their cookie. And we learned a lot of things from this lesson. We learned that sometimes we read through things really quickly, and because of that, we don't really recall very much information about it. I can tell you that my students really understood that after doing this activity. And we also learned that if you think while you're reading, and in this case, while you're eating the cookie, you will recall so much more. So let's look at closed reading in action. And these are some ideas from Timothy Shanahan, who wrote this article from Common Core Closed Reading, Scholastic Teacher Instructor Magazine. And I'm just taking a few of his ideas out of this article. He says that in a closed read, students should read the text 3 times. And they should know that they will read the text more than 1 time. So again, this is something I said earlier. Make sure your students know, okay, we're going to do a closed read over this. Make sure they know what a closed read is. We are reading our text more than 1 time. Let them know what they're trying to figure out. And he also says that not every text should be a closed read. And do not overdo closed reading. Now, in my district right now, there is a lot of talk about closed reading, and it's something that they are constantly suggesting that we do. But the more that I've read about it, and as I do it with my students, it is not something that you want to do all of the time. First of all, if you're really doing a closed read the right way, you are spending a lot of time inside that text. And so you would not want to be switching back and forth and trying to do that deep of thinking with your students every single day. They're going to get tired of it, and they're not going to want to do it. Text-dependent questions, he said, should not be able to be answered correctly if they haven't read the text. So it needs to be questions that you're asking the students that they have to dive back into that text to be able to answer. I started reading The Day the Crayons Quit by Drew DeWalt with my class as a closed read. And when I did this, I just said, okay, I am going to share, told the book that I was sharing, and I shared with them that while I am reading this, all I want you to think about is the crayons. And I want you to just think about how the crayons are feeling. So that would have been my first read. And I did not really front load with a lot of information. I just told them kind of what I wanted them to think about. Now, I knew what I was wanting them to get out of the story, but they did not quite know yet. They just knew that Mrs. Atkins wants me to know what the crayons are feeling or what they're thinking. So we went through, we read the story, and right after reading it, I had them tell me, okay, who are all the crayons? So we just listed all of the crayons. And then in our second reading, I used some of the ideas that were given to me from reading that Scholastic article by Timothy Shanahan. And I went back and I said, okay, what does the red crayon think? What is the red crayon feeling? What is the red crayon doing inside the story? And of course, they were all able to tell me he's written a letter. He is not liking that he's been used so much. And so they were really understanding what the crayon felt. Timothy Shanahan also says that during the second read, you need to know who is telling this part of the story. What is the author's purpose of the story? Those are some questions that you can ask. During the second read, what is the author's purpose of the section? If you're only doing a part, then ask your students, okay, what's the purpose of this? Why is this in the story? So now, after the second read, I was asking my students, okay, remember point of view? It's something we've talked about. What is the point of view of the different crayons? And so they already knew because they had been telling me how the crayons felt about being used in the classroom. And then I also asked them, how do you know that? How do you know that the crayon is upset because he's just a little stub now and he's been used so much? And so that is something where they had to go back in and look at the letter that the red crayon had written in order to be able to answer that. The third reading. When you are in your third reading, you should be engaging students in evaluating the text, and you should be letting them compare things inside the text. You might ask them, what reason does the author give to support this? You might ask them, what information do these illustrations add to the story? So you see this little girl here. She's reading the letter from the red crayon inside The Day the Crayons Quit, and she's really digging into this. She's thinking, okay, what is this picture helping me know? What is this letter helping me know? Those are things that I ask her. So closed reading is, these are some things that closed reading is. It is just an instructional approach, which means it's something that you can use in your classroom. You can use it to help your students with comprehension. You can use it to help them learn how to dig into a text so that they can be independent in that and they can gain knowledge from what they're reading. It's students adding knowledge gained from text to their schema. It's building habits of a successful reader. I tell my students all of the time, when you're reading a story, you are trying to figure something out. You're reading it for a reason, and that's helping you to become and grow into a better reader. They're also building their stamina and persistence with complex text when you are letting them do a closed read. Closed reading is also integrating several reading strategies. You could be doing point of view. You could be doing main idea. You could be summarizing. You could be retelling. You could just be having your students find key details. What closed reading is not. It is not a complete whole reading program. It's also not a time for lots of front loading. And I've already mentioned this before, and that might be more a note to myself that sometimes it's okay to not give my students lots of information in the very beginning. It's okay to let them try to figure it out themselves. Closed reading is also not for easy, short text. It's also not time to work on fluency or decoding. So if you're working on fluency and decoding, you're not wanting to do that while you're closed reading. So you're wanting to make sure that what your students are reading is something that is on their level and a little higher than their level. You want them to be able to read it independently. You want them to be able to savor what's inside of it. What closed reading looks like. So it looks like repeated readings, which we've already talked about. Repeated readings of the same story or the same text. It's the teacher setting a purpose for each reading. So beforehand, you as the teacher, you've decided, okay, what's going to be the purpose of the story? Why am I using this as a closed reading? It's also answering those text-dependent questions. Students being able to dig back into the reading, pull out the answer to the question that they've been given. It's also using text evidence to defend their ideas. And I know from watching my own students, this helps them greatly on test when they are given questions that they have to have a written response to, and they're having to get that from a story they've read. I'm able to tell them, well, you need to go back, you need to look, and you need to prove your answer. And they know now that when I've said that, that means, oh, I've got to go get text evidence. I've got to pull that out of that story and write that down. Closed reading and clues. So closed reading, again, includes a short text, and it could be a longer text. That part's up to you. You just take an excerpt or a book, and you pick out the parts that you're going to do the closed read on. You would not want to take an entire book and do a closed read of it. Again, some front loading, especially if there's vocabulary words that a student does not know. And closed reading is either students reading or the teacher reading. I like to read something first to my students and then give them a little more independence in the second and the third reading. But that doesn't mean that there aren't times that I give them something that I know they can read and I let them read all 3 times by themselves. Here you'll see a planning sheet that I found it was a free resource from the Classroom Key blog. And this is a great planning sheet to use when you've decided on something that you want to do a closed read. And you'll see here that this makes it really easy to pick a text and kind of just fill in those things that you want to find out about that text. You want to make sure that that text, again, is short but challenging. You want to plan out for 3 readings. It's really a good idea, especially with 3rd graders and below, and I would even say with 4th and 5th graders, to choose 3 skills to focus on. I would not focus on more than that. You want to make sure you set a purpose. You will notice some sentence starters on this sheet here, like get ready to talk about, listen for, mark places where. You're kind of setting a purpose with your students. Remember that each reading should just focus on one skill. So in your first reading, you might focus on main idea, but in your second reading, you might focus on word choice. Why did the author choose this word to put inside this story? You might, on the 3rd reading there, you'll see that that's when you want to start letting them think a little bit deeper. I think this resource really does help you as the teacher just kind of see how to plan it and how to take those thoughts that you have and just kind of put them a little more concise and help you just put that into practice when you're doing that with your students. Here you'll see some closed reading resources. Of course, social studies passages are a great thing to use for closed reading. You can take a passage, you can find lots of short ones and use those and pull out certain things that you want to work on with your students. Science passages are also a great resource for closed reading. Here's some books that I'm wanting to add to my library about closed reading. And one is Notice the Note, and that is Strategies for Closed Reading by Colleen Beers. Falling in Love with Closed Reading by Christopher Lehman and Katie Roberts. And then you'll also see Teaching Students to Read Like Detectives by Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and Diana Lapp. These are all authors that when you Google or begin research on closed reading, these are some of the ones that you keep seeing the names of their books just come up when you Google them. Now, I will tell you that I do think closed reading takes some time. I think it takes time on the teacher's part. I know that, in order, like with the day the crayons quit, in order to implement that in my classroom, that's something that I had to think about. It wasn't something that I could just grab the book and just start reading. I had to really be diligent in knowing what I wanted my students to take out of that story. What did I want them to take out of that closed reading? So if you've not tried closed reading, I encourage you to give it a try. Take it slowly. Pick out something that you know that you understand and you know that you feel good about your students taking and digging deep into, and then model it with your students. I would say if you have not done closed reading, you should be doing all 3 readings with your students and just really pulling out with them those things that you're wanting them to get from the text. So I want to say thank you for being a part of the webinar. I believe Ms. Pam might have some questions. Pam, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, ma'am. I've got you
Okay.
right here. Thank you so much, Tracy, for presenting on this tonight and sharing with us just lots of really good information here.